Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are. Well, welcome to GW Institute for Korean Studies, or GWIX. I'm Yeon-ho Kim, Associate Director of GWIX. Thank you for joining our Korea Policy Forum. Today's forum is co-sponsored by the East Asia National Resource Center at GW. As you know, South Korea will see President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol taking office on May the 10th. The incoming administration will have to navigate a new diplomatic landscape with the war in Ukraine and US-China relations facing a crucial point. And North Korea's recent tests of advanced missile systems pose an even greater challenge to the incoming administration. We are lucky to have four distinguished journalists today who will discuss the new Yoon administration and US-ROK relations. Let me introduce two South Korean journalists first. Jung-eun Lee is an editorial writer and a reporter at 동아일보 Daily. She was a Washington correspondent from 2019 to 2021. Kyu-seok Jang is the news director of morning news show at the Christian Broadcasting System, CBS. He was also a Washington correspondent from 2017 to 2019. Our next speaker is Josh Rajan, who is a columnist for the Global Opinion section of the Washington Post and a political analyst with CNN. And of course, a GW alum. Welcome back, Josh. And last but not least, Tim Martin is the Korea bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal. He has been based in Seoul since 2017. With that, let me turn it over to Jung-eun, who is joining us from Seoul. Jung-eun?
Thank you for having me. The president election was so dramatic here in Seoul, Korea. Now we are watching this huge radio policy transition from the very liberal to the very conservative, especially in foreign policy. I would rather tell you my conclusion in first generally, and then go to the details with the latest updates in Seoul. So we can easily assume that the Korea-US alliance would be much strengthened and the military cooperation as well. It is one of the most dedicated and clearest promise of Yoon. About the Korea-Japan relationship, it will also get better than now, better than this worst one ever actually. So Yoon understands clearly the needs of the better trilateral cooperation in the wider context of Indo-Pacific strategy of its ally, the United States. He will try to hold a summit with Prime Minister Kishida and resume shuttle diplomacy. There are thorny issues, of course, mainly the historical issues of the sex slave and wartime forced labor. And it will not be easy to solve either, even in Yoon administration. Both sides, I think, should find a solution, make a, let's say, exit strategy. On the other hand, we'll see tensions and conflicts rising with China. China is concerned of Yoon's foreign policy to be closer, lean to the US side. Definitely, they will not be happy with Yoon's promise to deploy another THAAD program in Korea. And I think China may take another retaliatory measures if Yoon implements this THAAD policy. Regarding this, Yoon's decision about the special envoy could be a clear signal of where his policy is headed to. According to the source close to Yoon, he would send special envoy to the United States and EU, and it was a very fast decision right after the election victory. We already had actually name of the delegation and specific date and schedule. On the other hand, there is no plan to send any delegation to China, Russia, or even to Japan yet. So this plan was reported first, and there were questions and criticism about this selective decision. So finally, the spokesperson of the transition team officially denied the report, saying that nothing has been confirmed yet. This little confusion could be interpreted by China that Yoon's foreign policy is more lean to the US side. Another point, look at who and when Yoon had a phone call as a president-elect with foreign leaders. The first call he had was President Joe Biden. It was done only 5 hours after Yoon confirmed and accepted the victory of the presidential election. And it was also the very first official work of him. So I think it is a very symbolic gesture, a commitment to the blood-forged alliance and the future cooperation. Then the second call was Japan Prime Minister, and then third Britain, then Australia and India. So here, as you see here, there are the leaders of Quad country leaders, except Britain. So it is another clear message that Yoon would actively find ways to get involved with Quad working groups. However, he hasn't talked to Xi Jinping yet, and we don't know when it will be done. Next, let's see the members of the transition team, subcommittee of the foreign policy. So Yoon is an ex-prosecutor general, a legal expert, but has very few experiences on the national security. Instead, he has his team filled with former MOFA senior officers, former ambassadors, and scholars in charge. So interestingly, we can find names and key people who worked in MB, Lee Myung-bak administration, and some in Park Geun-hye administration, the previous conservative administration. And one of the key members, Mr. Kim Tae-hyo, who used to work as a presidential secretary of national security strategy, played a main role in MB's hawkish North Korean policy. He is a strong alliance supporter and the one who pushes GSOMIA, the military inter-sharing agreement, GSOMIA, despite of the rising criticism at the time. So we can tell these people will work with Yoon to make a pro-conservative and pro-US more aligned policy. Just one more point. I think Yoon would put more emphasis on economic security. So we all see what happened last year with the global chip shortage problem. So the global supply chain crisis threatened the national security, especially when US and China had conflicts in global economy. So Yoon and his team is now working very hard on the policy to strengthen economic security power like semiconductor, batteries, 5G, AI, and aerospace, and things like that. So regarding this, Ministry of Foreign Affairs now wants to get the Trade Department back from the Ministry of Trade. Actually, MOFA had to hand that part to the Trade Ministry 10 years ago, but now they want it back. So it will be another interesting point to see which ministry will finally win this fight. So my conclusion again, I think Korea will have better and stronger relationship with the United States, ironclad alliance. But there will be constant problems with China and North Korea. So still we'll have lots of diplomatic challenges ahead of us. We are actually expecting the first summit with Yoon and President Biden in May, when President Biden visits reportedly Asia for Quad summits. And it will be on the first step of his 5 journey for his national security. So this is the part that I prepare, and then the North Korean part will be done by my friend Yoon-suk, and I'll talk more when there are questions about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jung-eun. Thank you for sharing the gist of the issues that the transition team is facing now. Yoon-suk, it's your turn.
All right. Hi. Yes. Since I'm just back to Korea, I worked as a director for a morning news show for CBS. And so my work is screening what happens in Korea on a daily basis, selecting important news and then broadcasting them to my listeners. So I would like to discuss about Yoon administration's foreign policy from the viewpoint of a news director. So I will just focus more on the overall social atmosphere and public opinion in Korea, which foreign and security policy are based on. So yeah, thanks to Jung-un, and you pointed out Yoon Suk-yeol administration's full power diplomacy, and I agree with her in many points. So I just want to briefly touch on the basis of Yoon administration's foreign and security policies. And so at the moment, many Koreans feel that Yoon Suk-yeol administration's foreign and North Korean policies are not that clear and at this moment. And also they are not in the center of public interest. Yeah, so Jung-un just mentioned about the relocating the presidential office, and that kind of issue is now is a very popular. So the diplomatic issues are a little bit put aside at the moment. So if you want to see some Yoon's view on diplomacy or North Korean policy, it's better to focus on the press conference on January 24th, announcing his pledges on diplomacy and security. I think it's the most detailed one so far. And I found some very interesting terminologies from the announcement. And that was the free and open regional order, freedom of navigation, human rights, liberal democracy. So what does this sound like? It's terms used in United States foreign policy, actually. And so, and that terminology is a China really don't like it, you know. And so, as Justice Jung pointed out, the Korean Yoon administration is going to be much more tilted to United States rather than to China. And why they are choosing that kind of movement is that I asked some people that why you like the Yoon administration's security policy or diplomatic policy. That many people said that because it's a very simple. Yeah. So far, Moon Jae-in administration's security policy or diplomatic policies are very complicated, actually. So acting like a very generous and considerate mediator, you know, you have to consider many variables, and like China, United States, and Korea, North Korea, and also the domestic opinions as well. So people are mainly, I think, very tired or fed up with that kind of things now. So we want very simple, yeah. So and simple is very powerful, and so through the presidential election process, majority of Koreans agree with very simplicity. So let's go with the U.S. And Yoon has made this very clear, and it seems a little bit less easy, you know. So the kind of Yoon administration's diplomatic position is much more aligned with the United States. It's very easy to predict, I think. And so let's go to the North Korean policies. So if you are seeing a Korean and you want to know if he or she is a conservative or progressive, there's one very useful way. Just ask what you think about the United States, US forces in Korea. So conservatives see the US forces with a memory of a Korean War. So North Korea is an enemy, and the United States military protects our freedom and democracy. People in their 60s or older who remember the horrors of the war or the hard days after the war, they are just in this position mainly. But on the other hand, progress sees the U.S. forces in Korea with a memory of May 18, the Gwangju democratization movement. The U.S. turned a blind eye to citizens who rested in Jeonduan military dictatorship. So they believe that U.S. forces are stationed in Korea to protect the U.S. national interest. So North Korea is a brother who must unify someday. So U.S. military must be overcame in the process of independent unification effort. So those in their 40s and 50s, which is I'm 40s, have grown up in the process of democratization in Korea are mainly in this position. And so what about in their 20s and 30s, who were born after the war and after the democratization movement? They are somewhere in these two perspectives. And I think now 20s and 30s seems to agree more with the conservative view. And that's the result of this election, I think. So based on this public opinion geography, Yoon administration is expected to be much more conservative on implementing its policy toward North Korea. So this means North Korea is very likely to be defined as the main enemy on the book in the Ministry of Defense's white paper. Again, and under the North Korean threat, the alliance is going to be much more strengthened, and the joint exercise is about to be restored and enlarged. And maybe you also can imagine the importance of the U.S. nuclear umbrella and extended deterrence will be emphasized. So sanction against North Korea is possibly going to be much more reinforced. And so, yeah, just I mentioned before, the pledges on January 24th, he just revealed his viewpoint on his North Korean policy. And also his contribution to the foreign affairs on February 8th, and his speech on March 10th, just after the winning the elections. Just in short, this can be summarized as the denuclearization first and economic development later. So the current Moon Jae-in government has just tried to give some kind of correspondent rewards, like easing sanctions to each detailed step towards denuclearization of North Korea. But the Yoon administration will say North Korea should take denuclearization measures first. So at the press conference on January, Yoon Suk-yeol, the president-elect, said that at least accepting inspections of nuclear facilities by the international entities would be the first step in denuclearization. And in a February contribution to the foreign affairs, Yoon wrote, Pyongyang's truthful and complete declaration of nuclear weapons could be the first milestone in restoring trust. So therefore, North Korea's nuclear declaration and permitting inspections of them can be set the threshold for the denuclearization, which is quite high. So, and then I would say Yoon has lived as a prosecutor all his life. That means he was a law enforcement man. So international law prohibits the possession of nuclear weapons, and the development of ballistic missiles violate the UN Security Council resolutions. So I think from his perspective as a prosecutor, it is very natural for him to think that violation of laws and regulations must be punished after through thorough investigation. So with North Korea is just continuing its illegal nuclear development, his belief that criminals should be punished and decision has to be made based on laws and principles will make it difficult to find flexible or very creative solutions toward North Korea's denuclearization. So what can I say more? Yeah, and about the Ukraine. Ukraine, the recent war in Ukraine had served an opportunity for South Koreans to think about the value of alliance, but also it served as an opportunity for North Korea to reconsider the importance of strategic assets, including nuclear weapons. Ukraine, as you know, used to be the third largest nuclear power, including intercontinental ballistic missiles. However, in December 1994, the Budapest Memorandum has been signed, and Ukraine just chose to be a denuclearized country, while international society just guarantees its sovereignty. But that agreement has just crippled now and by Russia's invasion. So if Ukraine has nuclear weapons, would Russia has decided to invade so that easily? This would be the question for North Korea, I think. So North Korea is likely to focus on continuing to develop their nuclear capabilities if they see that easing sanctions are not very unlikely. So and also I heard that a senior governmental official just told me that Punggye nuclear site will be restored by the end of this year. So that means the possibility that North Korea will test launch an ICBM, which can strike a US mainland with nuclear weapons, that possibility is growing. And so we can say it's that the cooperation between Korea and the United States will far more strengthened. But I want to ask one question that what if US policy toward North Korea changes while what if US wants to negotiate with North Korea while South Korea opposes that because North Korea has not denuclearized yet. So in the case of Yoon administration, I think it's going to be much harder to change the approach toward North Korea because current public opinion is a bit tilted to the conservative, and this trend continues. So just like the end of Obama administration, I'm not sure I'm correct, but situation that US wants to negotiate while South Korea does not want to can be happen, and this leads to a deadlock. So and that is one possibility. And another possibility is that North Korea just succeeded in developing ICBMs that can hit the US mainland. It's another variable. So so the possibility of public opinion can be changed, requesting dialogue to avoid war. So if this kind of new public opinion is just arose, maybe the situation can be changed because the public opinion now is divided just to 50-50. So just if 20s and 30s are changing their minds, there would be a possibility that Yoon administration just revise the North Korean policy, especially in consideration of elections. We have a local elections this year and parliamentary elections next year. So, and also the Yoon Suk-yeol, the president-elect himself says that he is not an expert on diplomacy. And so that he is likely to allow a lot of discretion to an expert he appoints. So who will lead the North Korean policy is very important, I think. So we have to see who is going to be on the position, and then how the domestic public opinion and political landscape changes. So this is going to be change the policy a little bit as well. Yeah. Yep, that's all I've just prepared, and thank you for listening. Yeah.
Thank you, Kyu-seok. Very insightful predictions. So I think that gave us a lot of food for thoughts, and especially your last question was directed to our US journalists. So Josh, how would you respond? What would be the Biden administration's expectations?
Sure. Thank you so much for including me. It's such a thrill to speak at GW, where I'm proud to have graduated from in 2001, and I'm proud to have finished paying off my loans just last year. It's really also an honor to speak about this important topic. I regret that I haven't been able to travel to South Korea since the pandemic started, but the last time I was there was November 2019, and I was traveling to Seoul with Defense Secretary at the time, Mark Esper, and he was there to reaffirm the strong, unbreakable bonds in the US-ROK alliance. And as when we got there, the news broke that President Trump was intending to blackmail South Korea for $5 billion in order to renew the base and troop hosting agreement. So that was just a crazy time in the relationship for a lot of reasons. We had fire and fury. We had 2 summits with Kim Jong-un. We had I was at the Pyeongchang Olympics with Mike Pence in 2018 with Kim Jong-un's sister. And, you know, I also reported at the time that President Trump wanted to remove US troops from North Korea. He wanted to drastically downgrade the US troop presence there, although his officials worked behind the scenes to stop him. So all of that craziness was what set the stage for the Biden administration's return to power. I say return because many of the officials are the same officials that we saw in the Obama administration. And their first job, and that's something, their first mission, of course, in these first few months, was to just get everything back to normal. They knew that they didn't know how the election was going to play out. They wanted to wait and see, you know, basically before starting any new initiatives. And frankly, the U.S.-South Korea relationship was not at the top of the Biden administration's agenda. Neither was the U.S. Approach to North Korea. Even now, a year later, more than a year later, we still have no ambassador confirmed to Seoul. Philip Goldberg has been nominated, but that could take another 6 months to a year. Who knows? We still have no North Korea human rights envoy. Nobody's even been nominated. The North Korea envoy, Ambassador Sung Kim, is part-time, which should tell you something about the commitment of the Biden administration to engaging on that issue. And, you know, I'm going to tell you I would like to answer your question directly in 2 ways. First, I'm going to tell you what the Biden administration has told me about what they think about the new administration in South Korea. I called a bunch of Biden administration officials this week to prepare for this, so I'd have something intelligent to say. And I'll tell you what they told me, and then I'll tell you what I think about it. You know, so first of all, I would say that, you know, the Biden team, the Asia team, which is the focused on the US-ROK relationship, is run mostly out of the National Security Council. And this is a team, as you know, run by Edgar Kagan. He reports up to Kurt Campbell, who reports up to Jake Sullivan. And this is really where the thinking about the US-ROK relationship is done. And that's not just this relationship, that's characteristic of a lot of the foreign policy of this administration. And what they tell me is very simple. They say that actually, you know, they believe that there's going to be a lot of continuity. Their story is that the Biden administration's relationship with the Moon government was actually pretty good. They thought that they had a good visit when Moon came to Washington last May. They thought they've had good coordination on things like Ukraine, and they generally believe that the issue of relations with the United States has become less partisan and less divisive inside the South Korean political system. They point to the election campaign as evidence of that assertion. This is the Biden administration's view, not mine, but I'll get to mine in a moment. They didn't see a lot of disagreement in the campaign about the relationship with the U.S. They noted, as you pointed out, that Yoon, during his campaign, called for things that Washington wants to see, like more THAAD and some relationship with the Quad. They noted that foreign policy was not actually a huge part of the campaign. And they also noted that Yoon doesn't really have a lot of foreign policy experience. So he's something of a blank slate, which again, they see as a good thing. They told me actually that North Korea doesn't loom as large as it did the last time they were in power. They believe that the US-South Korea relationship can be based on other things. And this is part of, as I mentioned, their belief that there's very actual little room for progress on the North Korea issue. And they are, you know, hoping to focus more on economic integration and cooperation with South Korea. They're hoping to work on things like technology standards and supply chains, and as part of their effort to reorient our dependence on high technology away from China. They believe that COVID is the wild card, and that, you know, both in North Korea and South Korea, the progress of the pandemic will determine the aperture, the opening for things that they can do. And generally, they're projecting a message of that U.S.-South Korea relations are on a solid footing and will only continue to be on a solid footing. That's the Biden administration's pitch. That's what they want us to think. Now I'm going to tell you what I think about that. I covered the first year of the Biden administration's relationship with the Moon government. Actually, I found that a lot of unhappiness inside the Biden administration that they won't admit to publicly. Repeatedly, envoys from the Moon government came to Washington with ideas such as a peace declaration with the North, the opening of Kaesong, that they were invested in and they were pushing the Biden administration to go along with, that were complete non-starters if you understood how Washington works. And, for the Biden administration, this was a problem because they didn't want to, throw cold water on the Moon government's ideas, but they knew they weren't going to work. So they had to pretend to work with them on a peace declaration and negotiate a peace declaration they knew was never going to work anyway. So that was something that they just pretended to do. And, that problem is now solved because the Moon government is now going away. On the China on the North Korea file, I think what the Biden administration is looking at, and this relates to the Ukraine crisis, is a realignment of how multilateral diplomacy and crisis management even will work. And we see that with Ukraine, and you can imagine that in North Korea. In other words, there's very low expectation that in the event of a new North Korean provocation, or major provocation rather, because the provocations happen all the time, that we would even get China or Russia, for that matter, to cooperate on anything, any new sanctions, any new Security Council resolutions. The prospect of the autocracies and the democracies working together on any big issue for right now is totally impossible. And that could become the new normal. We don't know yet. But anyway, that informs how the Biden administration thinks, because, as we move forward, they're going to be looking for things to do in terms of raising the pressure or punishing North Korea for its provocations that can only be done between the U.S., South Korea, and Japan, with very little expectation that Beijing or Moscow are going to play ball. And nobody really knows how that's going to work. And that also plays into the other part of the Biden administration's regional approach, which is their competitive strategy towards China. And if you look at the Indo-Pacific strategy, but if you just look at their actions, it's very clear that the Biden administration is moving towards a different strategic approach vis-a-vis Beijing that will manifest itself on the economic, security, cyber, trade, high technology, military, and financial spheres. Okay, we're talking about a wholesale strategic reorientation that was begun in a sense by the Trump administration, but is really being cemented and expanded actually by the Biden administration. Is South Korea on board with that? Well, we don't really know. It seems that the Yoon administration would be more sympathetic to that, but we don't know what their aperture is for that and what their willingness is to really take sides when it comes down to taking sides. Not to make the South Korea take sides but when it's necessary on certain issues, including high technology issues, will South Korea lean more towards the West and less towards China? That's I think something of an open question. On the issue of trilateral cooperation, I think that when I talk to Biden administration officials, their attitude is, yeah, sure, that'd be great, but what's really the agenda, And in my opinion, I don't think there's much agenda at all, frankly. And I think that the best that we could really hope for is that these issues are just not exacerbated, not made worse, not focused on, and sort of pushed off of the main stage, rightly or wrongly. I'm not saying they're not important issues. I'm just saying that in terms of trilateral cooperation, I don't see fixes. I just see either we're going to set those issues to the side and work on the realm of the possible, or we're not. And I think that's an unanswered question. I think that basically what we're looking at also is sort of a lack of bandwidth. Okay, the Biden administration is very micromanaging. Okay, and it's run by a very small number of people when it comes to foreign policy and national security. And US-ROK relations are not at the top of the priority list. We have to be honest about that. And neither is the idea of making progress on the North Korean nuclear crisis, especially given that now everyone's focused on Europe again and Russia and Ukraine, rightly because that's the thing that's on fire. It will be very hard to get senior leaders' attentions for big new initiatives in the US-ROK relationship. And it seems to me that any real initiatives will have to come from the Korean side. And if that doesn't happen, I think we run the risk of a strategic drift in the relationship. And so that's my closing thought, is that, just eliminating the problems in the relationship are not enough. In my personal opinion, there has to be a positive agenda that both sides can agree on, and then state publicly, and then work towards publicly with the help of all the people in the US-ROK community. And I hope that will happen. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Your last keywords, strategic drift, I think would produce a lot of questions from the audience, and I think we can discuss this more during our roundtable. Tim, you're in a perfect position to make comments while sitting in Seoul, working as a Wall Street Journal Seoul bureau chief. So you have the last word, I think.
Well, a lot of words have been said. I think strategic drift, some people dialing into the call, some people in the relationship might say we're already there. I think all the participants raised great points. I think we're at a moment of style versus substance with the incoming Yoon administration. There's a lot of, I'm sure Josh heard the same things, and Kyusuk and Jung-un probably heard some more things as well, that at a very substantive level between Lee or Lee Jae-myung, the ruling party candidate, or Yoon, either a candidate who had won, on a substantive level, there wasn't a lot of difference. And that reflects a bit of how little wiggle room there could be. We just sort of run this out, to the logical end. The US-China relations, if China, comes after Korea for this reason or that, how is Korea going to respond? How far could appeasement go? Same thing with North Korea. There is, they're up to weapons testing. Both sides want diplomacy. If we saw North Korea rise to an ICBM or a nuclear test, how might South Korea react? How did Moon react in the moment? With Japan relations, again, Yoon is suggesting a more warmer, trying to normalize ties with Tokyo, but that is a very unpopular issue here in South Korea. Anytime you touch that, the historical issues are just something that the electorate does not particularly appreciate. So you can go up and down the list. I think right now, as we saw with competing foreign affairs columns by both candidate Yoon and candidate Lee, you do see a lot of stylistic differences, but I think will the rhetoric match their action? I think we'll get to see that in the coming weeks and months, certainly as Yoon takes office. I'll just give a couple of very quick thoughts on the election myself. It was razor thin margin. It was the closest election in South Korean modern history. I think that reflected the divisiveness. It was called, many of my fellow peers out here in the foreign correspondent pool, we referred to this as the election of unlikables, or the election of, the unlikable election. There are many ways to translate the Korean phrase. But I think what stood out to me were a couple of things. We all sort of chose our different avenue into writing about the election. Some chose the anti-feminism culture war as a prism with which to view the election. Others chose foreign policy, with North Korea engaging in a spree of weapon tests early in the year. We chose almost like an absurdist angle for we did a foreign policy piece, but we also focused on the Yoon campaign and the Lee campaign's use of deepfakes, intentional deepfakes in the election, where they were trying to hit as many voters as possible, and they basically created a lifelike AI version of themselves to say campaign slogans and make other messages, which we thought could have universal appeal. But I will say, I think probably all of us out here, I've talked with some of the correspondents working for Western news outlets here. interest was very strong once the results were in, stronger than perhaps many of us expected. And I think that reflected where South Korea stands on the chessboard. Obviously beyond North Korea, which again is a lower priority in the U.S. Administration's eyes than the last presidential election in 2017, certainly, but it comes in a much different time with U.S.-China relations, and sort of how Seoul leans or doesn't lean will say a lot about dictating the region's future geopolitics. So I just wanted to follow up very quickly with Chung-eun from her remarks on the China front. I'm just very curious. There are former high-ranking officials from both the Park and the Park Geun-hye and Lee Myung-bak administrations, but they were 2007, 2017, around that time frame. It's a much different time for U.S.-China relations, a much different time for China-Korea relations. It's very interesting to go back and remember and see the photos of Park Geun-hye going to a military parade in Beijing, and to realize Xi Jinping had come to Seoul and gave speeches. And in the research I did for that trip, she actually broke practice and did not visit North Korea first, came to South Korea uninterrupted, and that was sort of frustration Beijing had with North Korea at the time, which is just sort of remarkable to read years after the fact. So I'm curious what your perspective is on rhetoric versus action vis-a-vis China. It's easy to talk tough on them, but if something happens, how do you expect Yoon to react? Because again, the advisors from the Park and Lee eras sort of had a different China in their sights. And then for Mr. Jung or Kyusuk, I just wanted to raise a quick point. I think you mentioned that there are younger voters. Younger voters really were swing votes for the first time in Korean political history, and swing voters along gender lines for the first time. Certainly with No Myung-hun, for instance, young people were very instrumental, and with Moon as well, they were very instrumental. But I wonder if you see, I saw the election more as a sort of a vote about the ruling party. And I think the majority of South Koreans just want to change from the current administration. Now that is going to injure progressives, and it did at the polls. It was still a very close race. I wonder if you see continuity in the years ahead, because I don't think the problems from real estate to the economy to job creation necessarily go away under the administration. I wonder if you think this is an ideological shift, or do you think this is more fleeting? Perhaps it's just disinterest or dissatisfaction with the ruling party, and this time it happened to be the progressives.
Thank you, Tim. Your questions for Chung-eun and Chang just smoothly open it up for a roundtable discussion among us. I think we have around 5 to 10 minutes for that. So Chung-eun and Kyusuk, when you're responding to Tim's questions, I also want you to address this important issue, which is how the Yoon's team is going to respond to this new geopolitical situation coming from the crisis in Ukraine. How the Yoon's transition team actually basically is considering this new strategic alignment between China and Russia, and how do they view this new situation in terms of US-ROK relations. I know it is really it is a little bit too early to have a clear idea of that, but if you can, if there's anything you can share with us, that'll be really appreciated. So Chang-won, did you want to go first?
Okay, very good point and very good question, team, I think. Well, a lot of officials who worked in Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye administration, I still talk to and communicate with. So as far as I understand them, I think at the time, when we go back to the, for example, Park Geun-hye administration, when she stood in front of that, how can I say, the Chinese part, at the time, I think there were still like some desire and hopes that the Korea could get help and support from China to solve the North Korean nuclear problem. So President Park and her staff wanted to show that they are ready to ask for help from China and cooperate with China for that. But now a lot of things has changed, I think. For example, China has changed it. Now Xi Jinping has got more assertive, more, how do you call it, authoritative government, and the US-China relationship also has changes. So a lot of conflicts, not only about the national security or defense or foreign affairs, but also economy and everything. And now, especially Yoon administration wants to be more aligned with the United States in terms of its foreign policy. So when it's about human rights, when it's about democracy, and when it's about rule of law, this administration will go together with the United States. And in terms of that, the China policy could be a lot different from them, even though it's in the same conservative administration, I think. Should I go directly to the Ukraine issue too, like to Yano's question?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So I think about the Ukraine and Russia policy of Yoon, I haven't heard anything from Yoon people about that yet. It seems there hasn't been any serious discussion because it's like only just started as a transition team. It's not just a bilateral relationship, but a multidimensional issue of whole world order, a real like Cold War era now. So, but I can say that I think it will make Korea more difficult to keep economic cooperation with China. China is our biggest trading partner and #1 overseas market. I cannot deny that. But now the situation will also make it even more difficult to engage China, not only the economic field, but to the national security, especially to solve the North Korean nuclear problem. China and Russia are always brothers, like work together to block US from imposing sanctions to North Korea at, let's say, UN. Plus, I think the pressure to choose one side would get higher as well. It's a real pressure to Korea. So Korea will face more difficult challenge in all of these aspects. But I can tell again, we have to stick to the principle and the international order. So democracy, rule of law, human rights, and stand for the people who fight for their own country and for their own freedom. And it should be based on our, Korean national interest. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Kyusuk?
Yeah, I'm not sure I just understand what the point of the question, but I think the answer for the team, I think the latter is much more close to the truth, because the young generations are much more sensitive to the kind of justice and the fairness, and they are very disappointed by the Moon Jae-in government, because there was some what can I say, the happenings about the Joguk, problem. The Moon Jae-in government just has come just as a result of the candlelight revolutions, and then many people that just expected them to be very fair and very justice, but from that Joguk problem, people just found that this kind of left people, the progressive people, also they are also another kind of what can I say? It's another kind of having power. They are not that fair. They are not that fair, and they are not that justice. So young generations are very disappointed, and then also the price of the houses is just going up and up. So they think that it's really hard to live. Their life is getting more humble. So they are very angry now, and so but if Yoon administration is doing that kind of things, and if they fail to show the fairness, maybe their mind going to change it. Yeah. So it's a very, I think it's a very changeable situation. Yeah. So, and no, I think the Yoon administration and the ruling party, is coming ruling party, is also very, they also knows about this. So I just want to see what's going to be happened. Yeah. In the election period as well. Yeah. And is it right answer for you? I'm not sure.
I was just responding to the point you had made that you had observed that young people were preferring conservatives, and I was simply asking if you had thought this was an ideological shift toward conservatism,
Yeah.
or if this is more of a fleeting or temporary protest vote against the ruling party.
Yeah, I would say the latter is much more close to the truth. Yeah. And they so just go back to the question about the Ukraine. Yeah. And I just want to just go back to the press conference on January. Yeah. And I was actually shocked to hear that the terminology just taken from the US actually. Yeah. So and also he just said that he would host the summit for democracy. So that means the Yoon administration is much more wanted to go with the United States and then making some distance from the China. So if the Ukraine from the Ukraine war, Russia and China is just getting more closer. I think the South Korean government or South Korean administration is much more close to the United States and Japan. So that kind of divisive phenomenon or that kind of thing going to be much more prominent, I think. Yeah. So even though China is a #1 trading country for South Korea, but as you mentioned, the situation is much changing now, and then some kind of force is coming, and South Korea has to choose which side we are going to stand with. So it's a very difficult situation, and then but Yoon administration's choice would be United States, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Kyusuk. Before we open it up for Q&A, Josh and Tim, do you have any comments to make? And did you hear anything surprising from our Korean friends?
Yeah, I would just say a couple very quick things about this idea of choosing. I think that what we're seeing, and I mentioned this earlier, is a broad realignment in the wake of the Ukraine crisis, and that fits in to the ongoing adjustment of U.S. policy towards some limited decoupling, not total bifurcation of the world's economy, but figuring out what we have to decouple from China and what we don't, especially in technology and investments. And I think that, as we look at in Washington at countries like South Korea who are wrestling with these very complicated issues, there's frankly a lack of clarity on the U.S. side about what the United States is willing to do to manage that change. And what I mean by that is, for example, when if Yoon takes another THAAD battery, and there comes economic punishment, right? That's what Beijing does now: economic coercion, punishing the private sector for the government's actions. Does the U.S. have a plan to deal with that? Do we have a plan to help South Korea, protect South Korean economy if the Chinese government attacks it? I don't see it, but I would hope so. Do we have an economic and trade strategy for the region that we can articulate, much less implement? I don't think so, right? And so this is the big hole in the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, is the economic, trade, and investment part. and it's a big question mark. And you know, as these issues are inextricably linked, it seems like if we want to encourage, and in my opinion, as an opinion columnist, I think we do. If we want to encourage South Korea to do the right thing and side with the democracies and resist Beijing's coercion and protect technology and work with us on reorienting supply chains so that they're both not susceptible to Chinese spying, but also not complicit in things like genocide in China's Xinjiang region. That's going to take a lot more initiative from the U.S. side in working out how that is all going to happen without dramatically negatively affecting the South Korean economy. So I think that's a big hole. And then, you know, the other quick thing I would say is the generational shift. You know, I don't know about the generational shift in South Korea. I do know about the generational shift here in the U.S. and Washington, and that is clear. You know, the on both sides of the aisle and both parties, and no matter who you talk to, the shift is towards a more competitive, even confrontational approach towards China. That's the generational shift that I'm kind of in the middle because I'm middle aged, so I'm maybe on the edge of it, but I'm here to tell you that for the next several decades, that's going to be the class of Asia scholars and thinkers and policymakers and lawmakers that are coming up. And so people in South Korea should just be aware of that. That doesn't mean that we're going to have a Cold War. It doesn't mean that we're going to decouple. It doesn't mean that we're going to have a hot war or anything like that. It just means that, as Kurt Campbell said, the broad period known as engagement is over. And, you know, everyone will have to adjust to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, a couple of very brief ones. I think I actually spoke with one of Lee Jae-myung's top foreign policy advisors before the vote, and we talked about Ukraine. And he actually acknowledged, I mean, it's the same, he shares a party with Moon, but he acknowledged that if Lee were president, he thinks he would have moved much faster on sanctions. South Korea, I mean, within hours of the actual Russian invasion of Ukraine, was saying we would join sanctions if, you know, if we had no other choice. I'm paraphrasing there. So there was at least some stumbling. Many saw that as stumbling for a U.S. ally not to move faster. I will say Wall Street Journal was one of the few outlets to get interview access, written interview access with candidate Yoon and candidate Lee before the election. And I'll just read to you what candidate Yoon told us about the U.S. alliance. He said, "We shall stand on the right side of history with the U.S. By making sure that those who undermine the liberal international order pay the price accordingly." And I think that's this is where the rhetoric in action will be very interesting to watch.
Thank you, Tim. Let me open it up for Q&A. We have about 15 minutes, and I think we already have many questions from the audience. So let me take the first question from Fraser Ronald. His question is, how do you expect the Yoon administration to address OPCON transfer? What kind of relationship would you expect the Yoon administration to have with the UN command? So I think this question is basically directed to our Korean friends.
Okay, so let me answer first, and then maybe Kyusuk can add some answer as well. Frankly speaking, I haven't talked about it with Yoon people yet, but I think, well, for example, in Moon administration, they wanted to make the OPCON transfer completed before Moon's term ends. And so it's basically, and definitely the time-based OPCON transfer. But the US wanted, as far as I understand, the U.S. wanted it make it more like condition-based OPCON transfer. And as far as I know, the Yoon people, the Yoon camp doesn't want to hurry like its ex-administration did. So I'm sure that there will be another like joint military drills, and they will test the capabilities of the Korean defense ministry and so on. So when it's ready and then condition-based being all completed, I think there will be OPCON transfer then, and then I cannot tell when it would be. And then as far as I know, once I had an interview with General Abrams, and he said that we need another like at least 3 or 4 years ahead. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Kyusuk, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I heard from the Yoon's campaign officials that to complete the transfer, the upcoming transfer, the Korea needs to develop their reconnaissance ability, and that ability is still way to go. Is a part to way to go. So I think that means so Korean military is still not prepared to take that transfer. Maybe Yoon administration is think that. So just likely just different from the Moon administration, Yoon administration will choose to delay or delay that transfer. I think it's a little more likely. Yeah. So and also that kind of outcome transfer issue is not gonna get much more great interest in Yoon's administration, I think, because there are a lot of other issues to be solved. So that is not that important issue at this moment, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me move on to the next question we have is from Joseph E. The question is, what are your predictions for advancing Korea-Japan security ties and resolving historical issues? I think Josh briefly touched upon this question, but historical issue, I guess, is still a really great challenge to both Korea and Japan. So who wants to take this question? Nobody volunteers. Oh, Chaman, please go ahead.
Oh, no, I mean, I thought that Josh would answer, but just let me have a quick one. So the GSOMIA will go on, and as I already told, the trilateral cooperation and the bilateral between Korea and Japan also will get better than, at least for now. And I think the US is pushing very hard for the both countries to work together. And even though the historical issues, actually there is no answer yet, no concrete answer. Like, as I already told, the wartime forced labor, especially the liquidation one, it's a very sensitive one. So there is no other way other than just wait and see and just hold and have talk and discussions together. So the Yoon is trying to make a high official talks together regularly, and then even summit as a shuttle diplomacy. So then more ice breaking, more talks, and then some part of the trade ban lift and things like that. But about the historical issue, I cannot find any answer yet from my side.
I'll just say.
Go ahead, Josh.
Oh, thank you. Just very quickly, I think I just say, in addition to what I said before, that when I talk to Biden administration officials, they say that they privately that they think the Moon administration needlessly over-focused on these issues and took steps that they believed, not me, they believed were unhelpful in exacerbating these tensions. And of course, there are some people inside the US government who think the Japanese government did the exact same thing. But what's similar about those two views is that they both believe that rather than try to solve any of these issues, they should just be deprioritized. And I think that's why the real push in the Biden team is to involve South Korea in some way, not necessarily part of the Quad, but in some sort of association with the Quad, in order to multilateralize the cooperation and thereby take the historical issues and sweep them under the rug as much as possible. I think that's the best case scenario.
I'll just make two very quick follow-up points to that. They are interlinked. One is, historically, Japan and South Korea have had any number of reasons to be fighting, and the bilateral relationship has ebbed and flowed over the years. But one thing that's brought them together is major North Korea provocations, and we certainly seem to be on that path toward a nuclear test or an ICBM launch, as other panelists have mentioned. And we actually got a preview of this just hours after Yoon was elected, really. The US and South Korea came out with a joint statement calling two recent missile launches by North Korea as a test run for their new ICBM. And I believe that was a statement or an assertion, declassified military information, that Japan was also a signatory of. So we saw already the three countries releasing information in a pretty unique way almost immediately.
Thank you. The next question I have is from Mark Tokola. How serious was President, excuse me, President-elect Yoon stumbled on moving the executive office to the Defense Ministry? I think Chung-eun briefly mentioned this while we were preparing for this webinar before we started. Announcing it, postponing the date, and then backtracking on it gave an appearance of impetuousness and poor management. Is that too harsh a judgment? So what's the latest, Chung-eun and Kyu-seok?
Just a short and quick answer. It's a very, very hot issue now here in Korea every day. So I can tell that President-elect Yoon is really, really serious about this relocating presidential office. And he just keeps saying that I will give the Blue House back to the people, and I will not go there, not a single day. So he emphasized that the Blue House is now the symbol of imperial power. So he would not go there and then change and move it to the Ministry of Defense building. My impression, well, there are a lot of ongoing, and then now even it's I would not say fight, but it's a kind of real conflict between the old and new administration, between Moon and Yoon. So, for example, President Moon Jae-in even had hold an NSC meeting and say that this kind of relocating presidential office could leave a security vacuum when we there will be some North Korea's let's say ICBM test or things like that. So and then they are not going to give Yoon any money for that. So we'll see more and more debate and conflicts for, let's say, even for 2 months. But I think in general, my impression is a little bit too hasty because there are so many things to move, not only about the buildings or desk or things, it's all about like even EMP and how to defend the Blue House and our president and things like that. So there are a lot more that we cannot see behind the scenes, and it will cost a lot. So it's not something that we should or we can hurry and then complete it in 2 months. So there will be debates, but I think it's highly possible that it will be a lot delayed. Okay, yeah.
Okay, Kyu-seok, do you have anything to add?
Not really. I'm not sure why the Yoon Suk-yeol, the president-elect, just wants to move to Yongsan area. Why? Some said it's a very kind of superstitious reason, you know, and then because the all president in Korea has got very what can I say, unhappy end, you know, so. And then some people just to say that because of the location is not that good. You know, the location is very bad, and so not to have that kind of unhappy end, we need to move to another place. You know, it's kind of moving the capitals in Joseon dynasty or something like that. So I just hope that that kind of fictitious reasons are not based on that kind of decisions. That's what I want to say at this moment. Yeah.
Josh and Tim, do you hear any discussions or opinions on this issue from Washington? Is there anybody interested and watching closely this issue?
Not that I can tell, no.
I see.
Well, some Korean people say that it's just like relocating the White House to the Pentagon and they put it together. So when you see this way, there could be answer.
All right, let me move on to the next question. It's from Mia Perman. What impact, if any, will the divisive nature of Yoon's election have on US-ROK relations? So it was, as we know, very close race, and the people may question whether Yoon has a strong mandate to pursue his own, policies, including, US-ROK relations. So, anybody?
Sure, I'll take this one. I think that there's a healthy understanding inside the Washington and the U.S. government that South Korean shift towards more U.S. focused approaches is incremental and fragile. In other words, there's no expectation that any of these trends that we see coming in from the Yoon administration are not reversible, quickly, in fact. And so, while there's I think a cautious optimism that the Yoon administration's foreign policy will be more aligned with what the United States government at this time wants, which again is not a peace agenda. It's not taking risks to engage with North Korea. It's a cautious and passive approach to that crisis, combined with a more hawkish and competitive approach towards China. That's what I think people in both parties and the Biden administration are looking for. But again, because there's I think a very smart and well-founded understanding that these moods in Seoul could change again, and in fact probably will change again. That time is limited to make real progress, and that if we do have an alignment of interests and an alignment of values in these two administrations, that there will need to be a positive agenda in order to cement some of those gains. And my fear personally, and this is just my own opinion, is that because of the distraction and because of the bandwidth issue and because of the lack of attention, frankly, lack of proper attention on the U.S.-South Korea bilateral relationship, it always gets subsumed into the Quad or North Korea crisis or the China challenge. And there's a lack of focus on actually just improving the strong alliance that we have, that if the United States more broadly and Washington more broadly doesn't make an affirmative case for continuing to move in that direction, that in fact that progress will not be sustainable in the long term. But I think we have at least a couple of years to prove that wrong. And I hope those of all of us who care about the U.S.-South Korea bilateral relationship will take this time to make those improvements before the winds change, either in Seoul or who knows, maybe Trump could become president again, and that would pose a whole new set of challenges that we could take another panel. Hopefully we'll never have to, but that we could take a whole other panel to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's anybody who wants to make a last comment, just let me know. Josh, I think you had the last word. It's already 10:17. So I'd like to thank all the distinguished speakers for joining us today, especially our Korean speakers for staying up late at night for us. I'd also like to thank our GWIX team, Josh, Sean and Kim, for putting this together. And of course, thank you all for joining us. With that, let me conclude today's webinar. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you.